Go Big 12 or go home. I'm Brandon Shanahan. We got Iowa broadcasting legend Drew Russell in the
Ooh.
building. How's it going, Drew Russell? You staying warm up north?
Hey, you know what? We're below freezing, Brandon. We got 16 inches of snow on the ground, but the roads are in great shape. Can do a little slipping and sliding on those back roads. We're rolling. What a great start to the new year. A lot of people hate the snow, but I personally love it. But I'll be fed up with it in a month. But I love it
Yeah,
right
the first snow is great. It's beautiful. It's nice. It's a change of pace. But boy, like the first time that you come back to your car like a frozen puddle of water in the floor mats, or you step
now.
in a
Ooh.
wet footprint inside the house, it's over. It's over
Mm.
for me.
Oh yeah, no, I'm going to tell you what, the amount of snow I've tracked into my apartment
Yeah,
is unhealthy. Like there is still I probably should like clean up the puddles if I'm too lazy. That's
yeah.
probably
I
a
mean,
problem, but that's is what it is. Like I just don't address it.
yeah, I'm right there with you. Luckily, don't have to deal with too much of that down south, but very cold here today. A little bit of precipitation overnight, and it's just it's crazy how much it took plow trucks. I took them for granted back up north. I mean, I haven't seen a single one.
They're like non-existent down south. Like they do exist, but not, obviously not near the number. There's no reason for a city to invest in it.
Right.
Like, but I remember it was like a decade ago. I think it was like Atlanta, Georgia got a bad blizzard. And they asked like how many snowplows are like in the main county of Atlanta. And it was like less than 5.
I
And it
believe
was
that.
just like, and I full no, and it wasn't shocking like at all. You're like, well, why would they invest in those?
Yeah.
There's no reason to.
God,
But that's the difference up here in the north, like outside of a heavy blizzard, there can be multiple inches on the ground overnight. It's business as usual. They got the plows out. Kids are going to school. People are going to work. They're not even phased. Down south, you get an inch on the ground, 2 inches, everything closes.
yeah. I mean,
Everything.
if it wasn't for
People
Martin Luther
just aren't
King
dealing with
Day,
that.
yeah, school would have already been canceled. School probably would have gotten canceled for tomorrow as well, just with the cold temperatures. It's a different world here. It's a different
No,
world.
and that's the difference. Like, like when I was a kid, like my parents, they moved from Iowa to Missouri, and we were going to school one morning. It was a cold morning. It was like 5 degrees for a high for the day, which was cold for Southwest Mo. And we got to the school and they closed down for the day. Like they closed school for the day because it was too cold. And both my parents, being from Minnesota, were like dumbfounded. They're like, closed because it's too cold, but that's
Yeah,
what it
I
was.
believe
So
it.
like each region handles snow differently. But it's cold right now, everybody. You stay bundled up, okay? You don't mess around. But just because it's cold outside, this could be a bad transition, Brandon. It is red hot inside with some outstanding Big 12 basketball right now.
I mean, my gosh, what an outstanding time. So Houston goes down a couple of times, of course, to Iowa State. Do we get to talk about that game last week? I think we did,
We
didn't we?
talked about a little bit. Because we went on right after.
That's right. Yeah.
We went on right after. So that was a big win for Houston. It was kind of a welcome to the Big 12 moment. You're not in the American Athletic Conference anymore. And then TCU, a huge win for the Horned Frogs. They're able to get a win over that old Southwest Conference rival. So for Houston, I mean, they've got still an excellent team, but they're learning quickly, and I think it's not surprising that Big 12 is not exactly easy basketball, but they're still a good basketball team. One that's going to, no question, finish, in my opinion, top 4 still in the conference. I'd be surprised if they're any lower than that, but I don't know if they're going to win it. They're going to have to find a way to win on the road, but it's been a very hyper-competitive conference so far, Brandon. 13 of 14 teams have at least one win through 3 games. Only 2 undefeated teams in the conference in Baylor and Texas Tech. So 8 top 25 teams. I mean, that's over half the conference. So it's pretty good basketball right now. It's hyper competitive, and it's going to be kind of, cannibalizing itself throughout the season because there's no easy games at all. I mean, Central Florida, I viewed as potentially the worst team in the conference, or a bottom 3 team, no doubt. And they beat Kansas last Wednesday night at home in Orlando. And that gym was rocking. I mean, there was a ton of energy there. So, like, give them credit for competing. Coach Johnny Dawkins and his team. Like, there's great hoops right now. And it's been really entertaining to watch.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up Houston because that's kind of at least for me, the big surprise out of the Big 12 conference. Luckily for them, they have looks like the 10th toughest schedule in the conference. Unfortunately for them, it comes out to being the 10th in the country as well, just with how loaded
Mm-hmm.
this Big 12 is. And I mean, this doesn't even look like a real list here. These are teams sorted out by rank of remaining strength of schedule left in the country, and the top 16 are the 16 Big 12 schools. Just
Yeah,
from
no
top to
question
bottom.
about it, Brandon. Yeah, no question about it, Brandon. Like, there's so many interesting teams just across the board. Like, just you look at Baylor. I mean, they have been great this season. By the way, have you seen their new arena yet, by any chance?
I've seen a couple of snippets on Twitter, and boy, that just gets me so juiced. I mean, that's exactly how you build an arena like that. And I wish that's how more teams would build their football stadiums, just quality over quantity. I mean, the big house, yeah, seeing that 110,000 number is insane to think about, but man, the experience at a place like TCU that only has like 45,000 seats is pound for pound is just as good. And I'm so happy that Baylor got that note, and that looks like a beautiful place to play a good basketball game.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous arena. They did such an outstanding job with it, and that's been a phenomenal place to play. I give you talk about Houston. I think that's kind of the surprise story so far, but I gotta say the other members of the conference, Brandon, are playing really good basketball. The other new members, I mean, Central Florida, I think, has been really good. Cincinnati has been hyper competitive so far. They've been very physical, and they've seemed to have made a good adjustment into the league. And BYU is a top 20 team right now, and they're not exactly easy to stop right now. I mean, they're going to be hyper physical. So, give them credit where it's deserved. I mean, they've played extremely well so far, but it's been fascinating. I mean, this is a 14 team league. And every one of these teams, I feel any given night can beat anybody, especially on their home court, which makes it a lot of fun.
Let me ask you this, Drew. Let's fast forward. We're getting our time machine. We're in the semifinal round of the Big 12 tournament. Only the best of the best survive here. 4 teams left. Who are the top 4 teams still competing for Big 12 title game here this winter?
Man, well, I mean, you got to Kansas. You can't. I feel like you can't start any list without Kansas. They are just great. 1 through 8. They've got depth. They've got guard play. They've got post down low. Look, their track record speaks for itself, Brandon. You just know they're going to compete. That's just kind of guaranteed. So you kind of have to go with them with one. I said Houston moments ago is still, I think, going to be a top 4 team. I just think they do have a well-balanced team. LJ Cryer, he's been kind of slower the last few weeks, but he seems to be putting it together a little much better. So I think he's going to be kind of good to go. Baylor, I think, is a safe 3 spot. They've got some really fun freshman guards that are quite good, potential lottery picks. So they're going to be really good. And then that 4 spot, boy, it is kind of up for grabs right now. I'm going to show some love towards Kansas State. I think what they're building in Manhattan is quite good. They've definitely got depth. They're very talented. Tang has been an outstanding basketball coach. They recruit well. But I mean, Brandon, there's so many teams that are knocking right there at the doorstep. And it's why I think this list could easily implode quick on my end, because Iowa State is absolutely nasty, especially at home defensively. They are a just disgustingly difficult team. Texas Tech is playing Texas Tech basketball again under a first-year head coach. It looked like they were in turmoil, didn't know if they were going to figure it out. And You got to hand it to them. They have TCU. I mean, under Coach Dixon, they're going to be tough, but they're a nasty crew as well. BYU's nasty. There are 10 to 11, 12 teams, I feel like, in this conference that could finish top 4 with the right breaks. Like, I think that's how much depth there is.
That's insane to think about. I heard someone put it like this, which doesn't feel real, but it absolutely is objectively. It like the Big 12 is so much better of a basketball conference than the SEC is a football conference, and everything that you just said right there points right to that. Several teams, probably 4, 5, 6 of them, who realistically could finish in the top 4, even in the best of SEC years. I mean, you're looking at 2 teams in the top 4, maybe, and then another 2 in the top 10, maybe. But I mean, not like this. This is insane.
No, I fully agree. And looking at potential Final Four teams, I mean, good night. I mean, I feel like half the conference has a legitimate shot with the right breaks and draws. And I know we're still a couple months away from getting to tournament time, but I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, there are definitely some opportunities available. We talked about how deep this conference was, I think, just last week in terms of national champions. I mean, Houston recently won it. Baylor's recently won it. Kansas has recently won it. Texas Tech played in a national title game 5 years ago. This is a good basketball conference, and it's not going to go anywhere. So, I mean, I do know this: the next, 8-ish weeks of regular season are going to be very entertaining.
And man, I'm just looking at the schedule here just for this week. It's just an insane clip. So tomorrow or today, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, TCU Cincinnati will be a gritty matchup. Baylor, Kansas State. Kansas State's kind of been backed in a corner at this point. I feel like where, I mean, they really have to start feasting, and boy, a win at home against Baylor would do just that. Iowa State and BYU, 2 great teams. Kansas and Oklahoma State, 2 good brands. I don't know if Oklahoma State's been in this conversation as much, but then Wednesday, UCF and Texas. We just saw UCF play spoiler a couple weeks ago. Do they have some more juice in them? Houston at home against a gritty Texas Tech team, who very well could be feeling disrespected by at this stage in the game. Who knows? And then the weekend slate. I mean, just outstanding. Baylor, Texas. That'll be a great one. Oklahoma, Cincinnati. That's gritty. Iowa State, TCU. What a game, and so on and so forth. Which one of these games, or you can even highlight a couple of them if you want, which few of these games are you looking forward to the most, or which will be the most
Man,
impactful?
well, scrolling them up, we'll go back to kind of the midweek slate. I think Texas Tech and Houston is definitely an interesting contest to me, because Texas Tech is off to their great start, one of 2 undefeated teams in the conference, and they're going to take on a ticked off Houston program, a Houston program that, frankly, if they lose, they're all of a sudden 1-3 in conference, and I would write them off immediately for a regular season conference championship if they don't win at home. So. And if Texas Tech wins, they're making a statement against a top 5 team in the country on the road, which would be significant for a team that just entered the bowl at 25 this week. So I'm with you. I think that's a fascinating game. Baylor, Kansas State is also an intriguing game. I think you hit the nail on the head. K-State, I think, has all the talent in the world. They could definitely use a nice signature resume win. Beating Baylor is definitely a nice signature resume win. TCU and Cincinnati, I think, is a fascinating game, too. These are 2 extremely physical, gritty basketball teams. That's going to be really good. I mean, BYU, Iowa State is a top 25 matchup. They've definitely had some fascinating contests many years ago. So, man, I mean, I could pick all of them if I really wanted to, Brandon. I mean, I mean, seriously, there's not that's the beautiful thing about this conference. There's not really a bad matchup this upcoming week, but Baylor and Tech are the only 2 undefeated conference teams right now, both on the road, and I think both definitely in danger of losing that undefeated conference record. And then the other, I think team just to keep an eye on, Oklahoma State's a team that is going through some heavy transition right now. They are 8-8 already this season. They're the only winless team in the conference in terms of conference record. Mike Boynton, he came into the season on the hot seat a little bit, and they're going to have to start piling up wins, Brandon. Otherwise, Oklahoma State, they will look elsewhere. It really is that simple. And this is an Oklahoma State program that's had some, really great tradition for a lot of years, especially under the Eddie Sutton era in the 80s, 90s, and thousands. So something to keep an eye on, kind of more in terms of just trying to save a season.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that that's the Big 12 game on ESPN on Tuesday. But maybe the TV execs know something. I mean, they don't with this slate. I mean, you don't want to have a Kansas Oklahoma State blowout game on primetime television when you have these three great matchups. Maybe they know something we don't.
They
Just throwing
might,
that out there.
Brandon. They might,
Tinfoil
and
hat time.
that's I understand they have to promote their streaming service, but man, if you're a Big 12, if you're part of the decision making process of what's on TV and what isn't, you want Big 12 hoops over your air. I mean, this is good basketball, really good basketball with fan bases that are terrific across the conference. So look, it's part of that deal, but to see 5 of those 7 games midweek be behind some sort of a paywall, and again, you can pay for ESPN Plus, easily watch. You kind of have to if you want to enjoy the games throughout the conference. But if you're ESPN, man, you're trying to push that product, I think, heavier on ESPN and ESPN2, and they will throughout the season.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just tricky because even ESPN only has so many channels, and there's so many good Big 12 matchups that it's still just interesting that Oklahoma State gets that bid instead of, Iowa State and BYU and Provo. Ooh, man, how fun is that game going to be?
That's a great basketball game.
Yeah.
Provo is a great home court for BYU. They get really loud. But yeah, that's going to be very interesting for Iowa State. I mean, they've been great at home this season. They would love to find a signature road win. They're going to get 2 cracks at that this week, but that's a game. Boy, if you have ESPN Plus, you're going to want to watch that one or try to have that as one of your streams for the night, because that one I think could be a quality game.
Yeah, I think it'll, if nothing else, it'll tell us kind of how real these teams are. I know Iowa State's had a couple of stumbles early in the season. BYU has been up in the rankings quite a bit this season. I mean, this is kind of a show me what you got kind of game, and I'm juiced for it. That's probably the one game I'm looking forward to the most. Now, let me ask you this: is it going to be a detriment for Iowa State to travel to Provo on Tuesday, come back, and then get back on the road to Fort Worth on Saturday?
I mean, it won't be easy, Brandon, but I think for these teams, they have to make that adjustment. It's not just Iowa State. I think throughout the season, every one of these teams are going to have unique conference traveling itineraries, and it's just kind of part of the territory these days. This is kind of the new normal of college hoops, college athletics. So, it's less than ideal, but they get 2 home games last week, so it's nice to be in Ames all week for them. I think that definitely helped with them playing 2 pretty good games. But it's not easy, but it's kind of comes with the territory. And I mean, everybody's got to make difficult choices. I mean, Central Florida, what they play at Texas and at Houston, those are the choices they got to make. Do you stick around in just Texas for a couple days and not, or do you fly back to Orlando, stay there a day or two, and then come back? I mean, they already, I guarantee, know that, but that's part of the conference. It's not just basketball for men's or women's. It's for every sport probably going forward, is they'll have to make unique traveling decisions with that.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. And as a big football fan, you don't really think about what those kind of travel schedules look like, because that, to me, that just seems crazy. Is to go out to Utah, back to Iowa, back to Fort Worth, and then right back after it again next week. But I mean, you're right. Yeah, this is just the norm, and it's going to get even crazier adding in more schools out west, and getting after it then.
Yeah, I mean it's not. I mean, look, we talked about it back in July, August regarding football. You're going to have West Virginia, who's used to some pretty wild travel itineraries by now for all their sports, but hey, they're going to have to get used to going out west. I mean, BYU is something interesting, and that's not going to stop. I mean, soon it will be Colorado, 2 Utah schools, 2 Arizona schools. So everybody's going to have some gnarly travel itineraries. Clearly, another podcast will dive into it, but I mean, how do they counter that going forward? Because I do think they've got to find a way to keep the regionalism in play and try to limit those itineraries. And I think it's possible, but that's something Commissioner Yormark and his staff are going to be figuring out going forward. But that said, doesn't take away for all these coaches and players. They don't care. There's no excuses. They go out and compete.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that we got to feel like 20 minutes on Big 12 basketball for the best conference in the world. That seems like a new record for this Go Big 12 or Go Home show. Because I do want to transition. Oddly enough, still football news pouring in. The first domino that fell was Nick Saban retiring. So I guess not really Big 12 directly related. We'll get into those ramifications here in a bit. But Nick Saban stepping down seemingly fairly unexpectedly. Do you remember where you were when Nick Saban announced he was retiring?
Well, I'll tell you what, Brandon. I quite literally was just working on the computer, and all of a sudden, I got Sports Center on the background, and they just fire that up. I got a couple texts that come in, and all of a sudden, you're like, "Wow, that just happened." And I kind of crack up. There were a lot of people that like said to me, text me, they're like, "Oh, you could just tell he was kind of done this year. He wasn't the same." I'm like,
I'm not
okay. I don't know what to say. Like, because I feel like people are just full of it. Like, I'm not saying around Tuscaloosa there wasn't an idea that maybe this is his last year. That's a small community. People talk. But it wasn't known on a national basis. You didn't feel like that was a national conversation by people, even remotely. So, but for Saban, I mean, clearly Alabama was ready for it, though. They had their plan in place, and I was kind of hoping for some chaos on that hiring cycle. I thought it would have been really funny to see them suffer a little bit. But they got a excellent in-game coach in DeBoer, guy that just took Washington to a national championship game. And for Saban, I mean, what a run. I mean, this guy, him and Alabama have helped spearhead modern college football to what it is today. And it is, I mean, Alabama, they've got a lot of money in their program. They invest a ton. So, I mean, they're as good as anybody, but there's a lot of teams in the SEC that invest a ton of money into their program and don't win even remotely at the level that Alabama wins. So, tip of the cap to Nick Saban. You can't. What can you say? You have to respect it. I mean, he all-time great success, and for DeBoer, huge shoes to fill. If he doesn't win quick, Brandon, it could get very interesting in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't give any real weight to anybody who's like, oh, well, you could see it in him. He also did an interview with Chris Fowler that was surprisingly transparent throughout this whole process, but really good interview, real good. I think like 15 minutes or so, sit down. And he talked about like it wasn't a done deal until minutes before he went to that team meeting. You know, he knew he had to go to that team meeting. It was either, well, maybe they're going to tell him what we have going on this offseason, or, maybe this is the time to retire and going back and forth. And I think quite the opposite. I think Alabama was caught very much off guard with this. I mean, you see the succession plans at schools like Oklahoma when Bob Stoops was ready to step down, or when Urban Meyer left. Ohio State, they had guys in the waiting. And I mean, a lot of other programs like that who, have a backup plan. I'm sure Michigan's got a backup plan if Jim Harbaugh does, in fact, leave for the NFL. But Alabama, arguably one of the best jobs in the country, didn't seem like they had a plan at all, which feels crazy to me because he's still 72 years old. And I mean, I guess you still got like contacts, and I think they got the job done. But I thought it was interesting how off guard it felt like they were. And then before we kind of talk about the process there, let me just ask you this. Is Alabama a top 5 job in college football?
Nick Saban made it a top 5 job in college football. Like you can, I think just because now they have that tradition and um, all of that. I mean, it's tough not to view it like that, but it's funny. Like geographically, they've got some very, I think, much more difficult places to recruit against. Getting Texas thrown in there is going to be definitely an interesting wrench for them a little bit, I think, with recruiting. Um, they've been so successful in recruiting because Nick Saban can point to his NFL success and say, we have gotten guys the league on a pretty regular basis. I'll say yes, Brandon, but Alabama is in the same danger as every other major program. They're hyper relevant right now, but if they miss, let's say Kalen DeBoer is not exactly who they thought they were, um, based on their standards, all of a sudden that job becomes more risky. And a lot of programs know that they have some difficult questions to answer. And if they don't win in a long time, people forget that golden run. So I don't know. I'm going to say yes, Brandon, but boy, it can be no really quickly because that fan base is extremely difficult to work with. Um, when you win, it's great, but they expect high winning and winning often. If you don't win, it can get downright nasty down there. And I mean, we've seen with their counterparts in Auburn, people are just crazy. I mean, we've seen Auburn fans. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see if Kalen DeBoer keeps winning, then everything is good. But I mean, we've seen fan bases, especially in the SEC, and I think certain Big Ten fan bases too, that pressure's amped up.
Yeah, I would certainly I mean, maybe pound for pound, like if all the jobs suddenly came available and we just did like a fantasy draft of coaches going to places or whatever that would look like, probably. But I think it was such a unique thing to see because I think Alabama thinks that there's such a better job that it's worth leaving an already great job for. And I think that was telling with it seemed like, and Joel Klatt nailed this as far as the pecking order he thought he would go. He thought it would go Steve Sarkisian would be their first contact, then Dan Lanning, and then if I got to Kalen DeBoer, that's where it would end. And I mean, throwing a Mike Norvell in there as well, it seems like that's exactly what happened. But looking at those three guys and where they're at, I don't think Alabama's starting starting over at Alabama. I don't think is a
Yeah.
better job than an established Florida State or an established Oregon or an established um, what was the other school?
Well,
Oregon.
Oregon,
Yeah,
Texas, and then Florida
and Florida
State.
State. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it's that much better of a job to where you just bail on those. And I thought that was really where it was going to get dicey because what happens if Kalen DeBoer decides that Washington's in that same boat where it's like, yeah, Alabama's probably a better job than Washington. However, I'm 25-3 here. We just won a Pac-12 title. We're going to go to a bigger conference, get more resources. I got such a good stronghold on the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast for these schools. I just played for a national championship. Washington's going to give me as much money as anybody. I'm just going to stay here, and then what? Because I mean, it feels like those are the only four guys that really could have moved, would have even been acceptable for that Alabama fan base. And even with that, I mean, there's no margin for error, nor grace for growth. It's hitting the ground running, and it'll be very interesting to see a guy who cut his teeth in Sioux Falls, cut his teeth at Fresno State, cut his teeth at Washington and the Pacific Northwest to come and try to play big ball with the guys down in the Southeast. It'll get competitive, and we'll really get to see Kalen DeBoer on hyperdrive and see what he's capable of. But real interesting process, I thought.
Yeah, and you're dead right. Like, and everybody's different. I mean, if I'm a head coach and we're seeing it, we'll talk Lance Leipold in just a minute with the Washington situation, how that process went down. But like, man, if you got a good thing going at your program and you like the area, and if the money's good, like, I mean, Alabama can pay higher than near anyone in the country. I mean, they've got a war chest of cash ready to go for their coaches. So I can see it from a financial standpoint why coaches want to go there. But that said, like, I mean, it's tough. I mean, if you don't succeed there, your coaching career is close to done. Like in terms of getting another big gig, it's not going to happen. And those smaller schools aren't exactly blind either to how quickly you're willing to jump ship if you feel there's a more exciting opportunity out there. It's hard to win. And, for Kalen DeBoer in Alabama, I mean, this is an ever-changing world. The SEC is a more difficult process. Can they keep up with NIL money? And not to mention, Georgia is kind of building a situation, Brandon, that they are as I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if when everything's said and done, Kirby Smart has won 5 or more national titles. I mean, I wouldn't be even remotely surprised. In fact, I'd be surprised if he didn't. I mean, I think that's how good of a machine that Georgia has built, where they could potentially just step right in and say, we're the new Alabama. And the way that they've played the last 4 years, 5 years, they've had a claim that they're the best program in college football, and no one would bat an eye. I mean, they've been great. So it's not an easy job. And if Coach DeBoer can't get it done, and let's say he doesn't, and let's say the next hire doesn't get it done either, all of a sudden, Brandon, you've got a fan base that's disillusioned, and then they're going to be asking for too much from their coaches. Nobody can stick it out, and then they build themselves in a kind of an identity crisis in an area of the country you can't build an identity crisis in.
Oh, trust me, Drew Russell. I know exactly what that looks like. And as a fan, not a great time. So hopefully it works out. It is interesting, and there's something to be said about. Well, I want to build a legacy like Bear Bryant. I want to build a legacy like Nick Saban. But you look at the changing landscape of college football. I think it's going to be as hard to win at Alabama as ever, because you got the guys in the Southeast who are like, well, if I want to go play and win a national championship, I'm probably going to go to Georgia and try to cut my teeth there. There's no longer that easy Texas pipeline for schools like Texas A&M or Alabama, where they feasted recently, where it's like, hey, if you want to get in the SEC, if you want to get with the big guys, you got to come to one of our schools. And now that they got Texas there, they got Oklahoma right there as well. Many more opportunities for those guys in Middle America to get there. Where you look at a job like Washington, who just went to a national championship game and lost to probably a, I don't know, top 25 team of all time in Michigan, and they were right on the doorstep. Now you have 4 schools to compete with, 3 or 4 schools out west. You get all that, the whole region of like, hey, if you want to play, and and I don't want to push this narrative. It's not the Power 2, but if you want to play in the Big Ten, we got to you got to come to us, Oregon, USC, or UCLA, and Washington's got as much momentum as any of those guys right now. So it feels like the easier path to building a power would be Washington. I know you kind of have to rebuild some of those pieces with Penix leaving and all that, and all those guys leaving for the NFL. That's going to be tough. But, I mean, you already had a replacement quarterback in Will Rogers, and now you kind of got to start from scratch. All guys out of Alabama. And the thing about this Alabama job now is that now that guys have 30 days to enter the transfer portal, you're competing with every school in the country to keep your own guys. Just to keep your own guys. It's not even like you can go out and recruit other teams' players and try to replace them. No, it's all just keeping those guys in house, which is a crazy challenge.
Well, and again, I think when you look at all the realignment stuff, like it would have been interesting if the Pac-12 still is around if Kalen DeBoer sticks with it. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, the Pac-12 showed they were a hyper competent football conference this year. After all these years of, they're not relevant anymore, they're kind of done, all this.
Lots of good, not great.
Yeah. They put together a phenomenal swan song on which, in fact, in my opinion, they had the most. Big 12 was hyper entertaining this year, but I thought the Pac-12 had some of the best games the entire year in college football. The Washington-Oregon doubleheader was great. Oregon State was awesome. Utah was entertaining. USC and their demise was hyper fun to watch. Arizona, seeing them kind of come out from nowhere and put together a 10-win year was great as well. But, it is interesting if that doesn't demise, if DeBoer sticks around. But it is an interesting debate of, Some coaches want the legacy programs. They love that. They want to be the guy at those programs. Um, I'm just saying it's not going to be easy. And Bama, I mean, I just cannot envision a world where they keep up that type of success without Nick Saban. I just can't. I not to like this is an all-time great coach in an era of, I mean, recruiting has never been more difficult, maybe ever. Winning, I think, is hyper difficult in today's college football era. And for them to consistently win year in and year out, um, I don't know if they can keep it up. I mean, and I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. He might be a great coach, but like, I think for Alabama standards, you have to be an all-time coach to win like at the level they did. Clearly, you have to be, and we'll see if they can keep it up or not. But I mean, you have a fan base when they heard Dabo Sweeney, like no Dabo, which I understand. I'll defend it because I don't know if he's adapting well, but this guy's won 2 national championships in his career. And they're just saying, no, this guy is not welcome to Tuscaloosa. An Alabama graduate, I might add as well. That shows the cutthroatness of this fan base. And, if you're looking to build a power and don't want to do it maybe in as demanding of an environment, that's why I think the Big 12 is ripe with opportunity right now to build a really good football power, especially with the expanded playoff.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Big 12, and I'm glad you did because the Big 12 also, is part of this collateral and this domino effect. Because now Washington, a very attractive job offering available, a team that just went to a national championship. How often do those jobs come available? I mean, few and far between. I mean, Cincinnati was in the playoff, and then 2 years later, their coach is gone. But I mean, that's the closest I can think of in recent memory. So then they look towards the Big 12. I heard names like Chris Kleiman at Kansas State, lots of smoke around Lance Leipold going over there, and then finally landed upon Arizona head coach Jed Fish, who was going to be a member in the Big 12. And frankly, I think they had a chance to be, at the very least, the best of the new 4 schools, pound for pound with Utah, and absolutely could have built a power there. But now he goes to Washington. And it stinks to see because I don't want the Big 12 to become a super um, feeder league for the Big 10 and the SEC, but this would be a hit towards that for sure.
Oh, I fully agree. And not to mention, I mean, TV deals, SEC and Big 10 are making more money than the Big 12 on a year by year basis. The Big 12 did pretty well. Like, I mean, they are a clear number 3. They've got a very fun league in many different aspects. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely going to be the big concern going forward is if a coach is great, do they get poached by a bigger school with more deeper pockets and do they take it? I think a lot of them are going to entertain that notion. Same with players. Is the NIL money going to be potentially more in an SEC or Big 10 environment? Absolutely. I think there's going to be multiple schools that are going to just have bigger war chest. And that is the big concern for the Big 12 going forward. I think the big thing is finding that they need to continue to promote is legacy hires and hires that have been around a long time. Utah's Kyle Whittingham is a great example, great football coach. Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, who has stuck it around for quite a long time. Gary Patterson was at TCU forever. Look, these are the type of guys you have to promote and succeed and say, look, if you find success at, I'll say nearly every single one of these schools, they will be ecstatic to keep you around for a long time. Like they're not going to, if you have a little bit of a disappointing year or don't meet expectations, it won't be an immediate, hey, you're gone or you're on the hot seat. They need to promote that and say you can live a pretty good life in the Big 12. And if you're a 10-11 win team, you can still find a road to the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my sales pitch is that it's such a vacuum. If you really think that you're one of the best coaches in the country, like I'm sure a lot of these guys do, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, the Big 12 is going to be the easiest path to that. And you talk about Alabama, whether or not it's a good job, to get any type of recognition or such, you're going to have to win multiple national championships, which is hard for, the greatest coaches of all time. And then you look at any opportunity in the Big 12. You look at a team like Texas Tech or Baylor, real deep in, great recruiting land. And now Arizona and Arizona State, and Utah, who have done well out in the West Coast, and Central Florida, who's in a hotbed, and Cincinnati, who can snag some guys up there in the North. And you just think, boy, if it it would mean a lot more to a school like if Matt Campbell went on a run and won a national championship. It would mean way more to the conference and to folks in Ames, Iowa, than I think even winning 2 national championships at Alabama would if you follow that up with several bad seasons, as we saw with Coach Ed Orgeron at LSU, a national championship head coach, had probably the greatest college football team of all time. And then 2 years later, he's in the unemployment line.
Yeah. And Coach O is the perfect example, though, because 2019 LSU is one of the great teams in college football history. I mean, they really were an outstanding program. Not even a bad season's next couple of years. They didn't play up to their normal expectations, but it was quick. Like, people just really, LSU fans said it's time for a change. They go get, Brian Kelly, and he's been fine through 2 years. But I mean, there's clear, like, hey, if he doesn't get it done this year, he's going to be on the hot seat. Same with Florida's Billy Napier. I mean, Florida's a great example of a program that had unprecedented success back in the 80s and 90s under Spurrier, under the thousands with Urban Meyer, and they haven't been able to recapture in the last 15 years. And they have absolutely no patience for any of their coaches, even if they have, like, sometimes you can't win a consistent level. You have to have an all-time great coach. And I mean, Steve Spurrier is an all-time great coach. He really is. And so is Urban Meyer. Love or hate the guy won everywhere he went. And that stuff means something, and you're right for Big 12 football. I mean, Matt Campbell's a great example at Iowa State, as you mentioned, Brandon, because look, Iowa State has had some outstanding seasons, historic seasons under him. They've also had losing seasons under him. And this fan base, as long as he keeps the program respectable and not a laughing stock of the conference, they're going to have patience with him. And I think rightfully should have patience with him. He's a good coach. And I think Kansas understands that. Lance Leipold understands that at Kansas, that, that's a pretty good job. Like, people are going to be very patient with me. And even though, yes, they want to win consistently at a high level, I think that stress and pressure of, hey, there's for sale signs outside my yard after a September loss, that's not going to happen in Lawrence with him. At least it would take a lot of losing to get to that point. So that stuff means something, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Because I mean, I would just imagine the circumstances for any SEC team if they were to kind of stumble early and like that loss that Iowa State had to Ohio. I don't mean to keep bringing that up, but it feels comparable. Where even folks in Ames were disappointed with the loss for sure, but never felt like they were out to get him. And then turns out that they just had a really young team, and they got so much better as the year went on. Had a couple of really big wins down the stretch, and now all of a sudden that Ohio game feels like such a distant memory compared to this team that we saw probably before the bowl game. Like, then that game against Kansas State is probably the one that comes to mind with just how well they performed there. And I just don't think that you get that. Joey McGuire has been given a bunch of grace at Texas Tech, even though he's underachieved in his first 2 years. But you see the pieces being put together, and then you get an opportunity to build something pretty great. And I don't think that you get a whole lot of time in some of these other conferences.
Yeah, it just depends on fan bases, patience. And fan bases don't have as much patience as they used to. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
I think just in the era where anybody can transfer at any time, NIL, like, it used to be, hey, you got to give a coach 4 or 5 years to let them install kind of their players, their program, all that. And these days, Brandon, like, if you don't have a formula within 2 years, like, a lot of fan bases lose it quick. They're like, this guy has no idea what they're doing. And that patience is low. This is a culture and society that doesn't have time for rebuilds anymore. It's an expectation of we win now, no matter the sport. And it is pretty interesting to see In the Big 12, it's fascinating to watch from a football standpoint. They have done a really good job of kind of marking themselves as we're the premier basketball conference in this country right now. And a lot of people, and I think it helps that their metrics, the games clearly show it, but like they have the best product in the country right now from a college basketball standpoint. It is hyper entertaining to watch this conference, and it's only going to get better next year, even with the losses of a good Oklahoma program and a good Texas program. Like they've got 4 teams coming in that are good to great. I mean, Arizona's a great basketball school. Utah, Colorado, Arizona State have been good in stretches. So, like they've done a good job of benchmarking that. I think their big question is how do they find a way to get on par with Big Ten and SEC? And is there a route? I think that's the big question in terms of because it's going to come down to money on most of it, Brandon. And right now, SEC and Big Ten schools are going to be bringing in more cash. But for all we know, look at how much college sports have changed the last 5 years from a realignment standpoint and just how everything's done from NIL, transfers, etc. Could it look completely different than where it is right now in 5 years? Oh, easily. And frankly, I'd be a little surprised if it's not completely different than where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's really tough to throw out predictions like what you think is going to look like is going to look very different than what it does now, and it's frustrating because there are solutions that make sense that probably won't get a second look. Because it won't bring, it's not as revenue generating as maybe another situation that doesn't make as much sense, or it's just too complex to put the time into. But there's solutions out there. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I still think the Big 12 is in really good shape as far as football goes. I think they still have a lot of good conferences. I think they're going to be so fascinating to see just who becomes a new kingpin. I mean, Texas and Oklahoma, mostly Oklahoma, dominated this conference pretty much since the inception, and now those two kingpins are gone. There's a power vacuum. A lot of good, not great teams showing up who can make that next step. Lots of teams who think they can do it, and then of course the without a doubt best basketball conference in the entire country by a wide margin. Like I said, only going to get better. So I think the Big 12 is in great shape. And if nothing else, I mean, the football might not produce a bunch of national champions like the SEC or now the Big Ten's poised to do with their additions. But man, as a fan, I mean, I don't know if it's going to get any better than this. It just means more here.
Yeah, I think from just a competitiveness standpoint, I think the viewpoint of it's going to feel like it's going to be open every year, at least initially for football, because there's really no dominant power going into this new 16 team league is going to make it hyper exciting. Because I feel like every fan base deep down feels like they're this close, hyper close to, building a potential power. And that's exciting for any fan base. I think the key for the Big 12, though, is seeing who can step up immediately and build a power, because I do think it helps just from a conference perception standpoint to have powers. SEC football, I mean, it was more of a regional product for a lot of years, but it really helped that they got some national powers throughout. I mean, I think Florida was a major power in the thousands that helped bring relevancy. Alabama then took that torch. LSU was always very competitive. Obviously, Georgia is a current one, and shoot, even Auburn. I mean, they took it for a year too. I mean, they won a national title with their nice under the table payment to Cam Newton. But hey, today it'd be legal. So, I mean, can we get that mad about it? I guess I don't know, but you're right. Doors wide open. It's an exciting time, and I think recruiting is still going to be a major impact. I think recruiting numbers, that's something Big 12 is going to have to find a way to get up in the next 5 years to see if they can be a little higher across the board. I think they can get there, but it's going to take work, and they've got to create this perception of we are as good of a conference football-wise or close to as the Big Ten and SEC, but that's going to take definite work to get there.
I think you're absolutely right. That's all I had, Drew. I mean, we hit on a lot of topics here. Got to go through our Big 12 basketball update, the Nick Saban dominoes that still haven't completely concluded because now Arizona's got a head coaching job. Obviously, not as much weight to that as maybe the first few dominoes, but glad we got into that. And then
Yep.
the future of college athletics and the Big 12 in particular is just so interesting to me. We'll have several episodes about it throughout the football off season here. I'm excited about it. Anything else like to add before we sign off?
I've got two things, Brandon Shanahan. Number one, I want Pick'em coming back for college basketball. I miss it. I've been craving to pick some games. So I'm hoping maybe starting next week we can conjure up a little wager in the future and maybe get to doing some maybe just straight Pick'em. No, just straight Pick'em. I think we got to make something interesting this college hoop season. So
I was looking at the spread of games and just kind of how it's all laid out. Uh, I'm in. I'm in. I'll get that set up. We'll have some pick'em coming back here next week. I do miss it as well. I'm not as well. I would say I'm not as well versed on basketball as I was football, but obviously even picking football games, it didn't work out that well for me. So let's give it a go. I'll have that ready for us next week here.
So yeah, that's really I think the big thing, Brandon. But we got some exciting hoops ahead this season. I'm really excited to keep talking about it because Big 12 basketball I think is great right now. We're really in a golden era of the league. I mean that. I think it's special. It's fun and we might be watching a potential national champion in one of these teams throughout this season as well, which is going to be a lot of fun. So, a lot of good stuff ahead, Brandon. Can't wait to keep talking about it.